Welcome to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages, with your host, Matthew Shipp. This is the podcast for all of those who are involved in the agriculture all the way to the distribution of beverages. And now your host, Matthew Shipp.
Hello and welcome to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages. I'm your host, Matthew Shipp, and today I am here with Howard Lerner. He is the original founder of Kaldi's Coffee. Kaldi's was founded here in St. Louis. It's a third wave wholesale roaster and full service. It has front shops, roasteries, and it has grown to be in about 3 different states, I think. Or is it just Atlanta, Nashville, Kansas City, some in Missouri? Is there any place else there, Howard? Anyway, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Matt. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. There may be, there's a lot of wholesale out there. So, it can, but under the Kaldi's label, retail is limited to those 3 states.
All right. Well, before we really get into it, tell us a little bit about yourself and how Kaldi's got its start.
Well, I was a journalist before I was in the coffee business. And so in fact, I want to correct one point. I was not the founder. I was a co-founder. I have a partner. Suzanne Langlois was my partner, and that you bring that up because part of the origin story, of course, is Suzanne's half of that story. And we were graduate students in journalism at the University of Missouri in the early 90s. And we actually became working journalists. I was working in Washington, D.C., and Suzanne was a reporter in Jefferson City covering the State House. And we worked, and then I came back to St. Louis to work for the St. Louis Business Journal, and she was at the Riverfront Times. And we started talking about starting a business. And we thought about maybe some real estate development, historic renovation, restoration was popular back then. And then we decided that was too expensive because we really didn't have any money. And so we decided, well, we love coffee. Why not do something coffee related? And we had some great experiences in graduate school with a cafe, little espresso roastery, but not a roastery, but a little walk-up cafe in Columbia, Missouri. Those of the time will remember Espresso Arno, which was right next to the Blue Note in what was the old box office at the Blue Note, which is right on 9th Street in Columbia, Missouri. And they had a little espresso machine, nowhere to sit. You just walk in, order your coffee and get out. And it was, it really inspired us. We loved the vibe, and we just thought that was really great. So, we thought, well, maybe we can do something like that. And so that was the origin of the idea of opening a coffee place. And so that's where that came from.
What really stuck out to you about the Espresso Gino?
Espresso Arno. Espresso Arno is, the coffee was of very high quality. At the time, there weren't options. I had espresso, but I never had tried good espresso. And I don't think I would have known what good espresso was. It was, there was espresso. And in my mind, it was just simply a small shot of strong coffee. Obviously, there's so much more to it. But, I enjoyed the way the baristas would hand prepare each serving, each shot, grind, and then with great care, tamp and insert the portafilter, that's that handle, into the espresso machine and extract at that 9 bars and really provide that crema, provide that great aroma, the beautiful appearance of the emulsion of the coffee, the liquid coffee and the carbon dioxide, the gases, all of those things produce that sudsy crema that we always identify with an excellent espresso. So that's those experiences. Plus, Tom was the owner. He was a wonderful guy, and we just had some really nice conversations about everything. He was just, it's amazing. A good barista can be super busy and still be able to give undivided attention to the customer and have a chat. And that's that multitasking role. So we were in awe, and we really enjoyed that. And it just took a little while for that to realize, for us to realize that maybe that's something we could do. Maybe we were looking for an idea. We were two entrepreneurs looking for an idea, for some inspiration. And newspapers were kind of struggling at the time. So it was before the internet really took off, but it was the 24-hour news cycle was, with cable had really started. So newspapers were kind of, struggling to compete. Things have changed a little bit, but that's where we were, just kind of frame the culture at the time.
Oh, great. And now that you had that inspiration and that energy of wanting to start possibly this coffee shop, what were some of the first challenges you ran up against and, things you unexpected?
Boy, well, aside from just the cost of opening a store, finding a location, let's just go back, finding a location, they says, well, the most important thing, your location is the biggest cliche in business is absolutely true. Without location, there are ways of being successful without great location, but it doesn't hurt. And so we really realized that, well, our own neighborhood, we lived in an area of St. Louis called Demond, and that was location we identified that location. Hey, we were tired of driving to work. We didn't want to pay for parking anymore and all the hassles that we had working in our downtown newspaper jobs. We thought it would be great to kind of roll out of bed and wander down to work on foot. And that was kind of one of our goals. And it happened to be, I think, the most, or if not one of the most iconic neighborhoods in St. Louis. So Demond neighborhood that's where we were. And we were fortunate enough to make enough friends in that area, the other businesses and antique shops, things like that. And a woman who owned an antique shop said, oh, well, that space next door is opening up. And we jumped on it. And that was our biggest challenge. And it was pretty easy to solve because we, again, put our contacts and our friends and our neighbors to work to help us locate a good location. So it wasn't that hard.
So you got your first, your win, your location.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now you got to get the coffee and you got to learn how to roast it. How'd that go?
Well, let me back up. We didn't roast from the beginning. The first year we were buying the coffee of a roaster that was already in existence. So,
okay.
And that's kind of interesting. We actually reached out to, I mentioned Espresso Arno at the beginning in Columbia, Missouri. Tom's the owner. His contact in coffee as a supplier was Sugar Creek Coffee in Kansas City, Missouri. They're no longer around, unfortunately, but we connected with them and they sold us our coffee and created our blends for us and worked closely with us and hosted us to teach us everything they knew about coffee. And so we grew with them. We quickly became their biggest customer. And in fact, it was funny. This is, again, you couldn't get like overnight shipping. We were using so much coffee and it was costing so much to ship it because it's so heavy that we would have the coffee brought in on a Greyhound. So that was, the logistics.
A Greyhound.
A challenge. Yeah. Yeah. So we had a Greyhound bus. I'd literally drive my pickup truck down to the Greyhound bus station in downtown St. Louis and get our coffee off the bus. It's the cheapest way to do it. It was like, buy a ticket for your coffee.
You buy a ticket for your coffee. They put it on the under part where they put the luggage and stuff, and they get their own seats.
No, one gate is right. They just like shoved it under in the little, all seated in the movies.
Wow, that's some innovative thinking there, though. That's great.
Yeah. It was kind of a rare moment of brilliance. It was like, wow, it's being cheaper to put it on a bus than it is to ship it UPS.
So at what point did you realize or feel the need you wanted to roast?
Yeah. So the roasting started almost a year to the day after we opened. It was in October. We opened in October of 1994. And in October of 1995, we installed a roaster. And we realized that we were, this Greyhound buses, this isn't really sustainable. We were using so much coffee and we hadn't really even started selling coffee beans yet to our customers. Mm-hmm. That was at the time, at least I don't know if it's still the case, it was a real trust issue. People to know who we were. We're good enough for people to buy a cup of coffee, but to buy a bag of beans, that was getting into their habit or routine. So we hadn't made that impact on our customers yet. So we just said, we still had a tremendous amount of coffee to buy, but we knew we had a lot of growth, a lot of potential. And so we started researching by the time this early internet, we were able to make a connection with a gentleman in Reno, Nevada named Sherman Dodd. And he was one of the early manufacturers of shop roasters, we call micro coffee roasters. And I flew out to, Nevada in the summer of 95 and spent a week there with Sherman. He was showing me how it worked. And I placed an order as soon as I got back. And a few months later, we had our roaster delivered and it was installed completely wrong. And we had a big fire.
You had a big fire, huh?
Yeah, because they used there was no company that could install coffee roasters at the time. That really wasn't a thing. So we just hired the HVAC company. Thought it was more like a dryer than a roaster. It's
Oh,
not,
man.
unless your heating system gets up to 500 degrees, and they put the wrong vent on, and we just learned a lot about that. So never made that mistake again. And if you go to the original cafe, Caldi's, you'll see the original smokestack where the original roaster was on the side of the building.
Oh, okay.
Kind of look closely. It's still there.
It's still there.
It's not going anywhere. Yeah.
You've learned what not to do the hard way.
I've learned everything by what not. Every element of that shop, I can point. Every element was a mistake. Everything is a mistake.
Really?
A mistake that was then corrected. Or
Yeah,
not.
yeah. You learn from it. Yeah,
you learn.
absolutely.
The whole place is like just a tattered textbook.
You mentioned back bringing in roasting and having the people trust that you were roasting, and now, instead of having a guest roaster. Was that something new to the scene? Roasting with a storefront?
Oh, yeah. There was nobody roasting. No one had a coffee roaster in the window in St. Louis at the time. That was, people were still talking about coffee as being free or like 5 cents. I mean, why would I buy a cup of coffee for, at the time, $1.25, which was a lot of money for a cup of coffee. And that was our big plan to change the world. But we're competing with the free office coffee. You get your coffee in the office, and when you get to work, why should I pay for that? Or coffee at the St. Louis Bread Company, they call Panera now, or you could get it at the gas station. Coffee was something you really didn't think about. It was just something that was sort of bitter, and it was a caffeine delivery system, and that's really all it was. It was just that. It wasn't there were some glimmers of it in some areas like Espresso Arno, for those who could appreciate it, but nothing really in St. Louis. There were some espresso machines, but I don't really think anyone knew how to use them properly.
What do you believe helped you start to change minds and offer a little bit more for their coffee and be accepting of roasting in the window and serving what you make?
Well, I am not going to try to create this fiction that we knew anything about coffee more than just thinking what you learned about handling it, for a year. I was not a connoisseur of coffee, cupping and, grading coffee and all the cues, Q cuppers, all of these features that came later. They weren't around yet. This really wasn't a quality play as much as a reality that we just couldn't continue ordering coffee from a roastery in Kansas City. They had very good coffee. If they had been local, we may never have roasted coffee, or at least not for quite a while. It was not about it. We did not have a quality problem. Our quality was better simply because the coffee was fresher. Really, most people were used to cans of coffee in a can, which had been popular since the railroad era, when your early grocery distribution started, advertising and all of that stuff. That's what that started. And so that's what the flavor that people, and what's that flavor? That flavor is stale. That's what people are used to. When people tasted coffee before, the coffeehouse movement, the flavor that they were accustomed to was stale. And if you're used to stale, once it's not stale, it's going to be a lot better. You're going to notice that coffee here. And I know it sounds kind of silly and obvious, but it wasn't obvious. Most people, my age, I'm 58. I grew up, if it wasn't from a can, it was instant coffee. There were a few little coffee shops where you could get coffee beans, but you couldn't buy a cup of coffee there. It was just a coffee bean shop. There were a few of those in town, but it was a different kind of a thing. It's hard to describe that, but so to the point of it wasn't really so much a quality play as a logistics and just a business decision to do that. And we thought it would be cool to put the roaster in the window, because when I saw that roaster, it was beautiful. It looked like a choo-choo train. It really did. It looked like sitting in the window. It looked like, and kids would walk by and they go, "Oh, look at a choo-choo." And I'd be roasting in the window for people. And it was like performance. But we didn't really know how to make great coffee. We were just kind of following the steps, pour it in, turn up the heat, and wait 12 to 14 minutes and pull it out. And it was inconsistent and all over the place, but it didn't matter because it was all relative. We would have been eaten alive by our competition today with that coffee, but we kept improving. And so, yeah, look at it through 1995 eyes, not
absolutely. That's what I'm really enjoying this journey of how things have grown.
It's grown quite a bit. Yeah.
And speaking of the journey, we're getting into the heart of what this podcast is about, is the harvest pour. And when I say that, again, for listener, I want to find out where you sourced, how you learned how to source coffee, how you started, like you just mentioned, bringing it up to make it your own, make it Caldi's. And then we're going to get a little bit into, building out your shop and how you started selling it, how you started promoting that. And you had baristas to train, something new in that concept as well. So let's go back to the harvest. So how did you start finding out about green coffee, where it came from? How is it different? How was it different then as it is now?
Yeah. Well, today, if you are a coffee roaster or a kind of sophisticated amateur, you have, multitudes of options for acquiring green coffee. There's a company, for instance, called Sweet Maria's, that is a website. You can order small amounts of green coffee and roast at home. There was nothing like that in 1995. There were no specialty brokers, even on a large scale. Even if you were in the position of buying multiple bags of coffee, green coffee, unroasted coffee, pre-roasted, I should say, coffee comes in these 154-pound bags. That's the way it was back then. Now there's smaller bags, but at the time it was 154-pound bags, the 70 kilos, and they come in these jute. They're like jute. People call them burlap, but it's really jute bags, and they, you could order. There were maybe 10 different types of coffee that were available at the time to people like me and Suzanne. And we bought Colombias, we bought Ethiopians. We didn't have much choice of which farm or what region. Colombia is so diverse terrain within that small country based on altitude. So we weren't sophisticated in any way. Just like on the espresso side, we just got what we could get, and we ordered what we could get. And there were enough of companies like ours. It was Caldi's, and there's also other companies like Intelligentsia in Chicago. They were starting up around the same time, I think 1996, a couple of years later. Other roasters, the roastery in Kansas City, all coming up at about the same time. PTs in the region, all of them were kind of coming up at the same time. And we were facing these problems. So this new industry was growing. But at the beginning, it was very simple. You don't have a sophisticated and time-consuming and big learning curve when you only have 5 or 10 potential varietals that you have access to, and maybe a decaf. So
maybe a decaf.
It quickly changed, though. We noticed the landscape was changing. All of a sudden, these different brokers are bringing on these specialty lines. They're all in New York or New Jersey or LA, and we'd make these connections, and we would buy coffee from these brokers, and they would educate us. They're used to cupping for the people who are putting coffee in cans. It still needs to be cupped. Cupping coffee is evaluating the quality of the green coffee. And what they were not used to is evaluating it from a connoisseur level. They're used to evaluating on a palatability. Is this even drinkable? If it's drinkable, box checked, we'll go ahead and roast it and throw it in a can. And that was quite frankly what, like I would just say, Renoco, very fine people. That was a 100-year-old business that was a big challenge for them because they were set up for mass producing coffee for hotels and restaurants and offices. We didn't have to recreate our system to appeal to the new third wave. I'll talk about third wave in a little bit, but the new sort of high level quality expectation that customers grew to have a few years after we opened. We were able to create that industry along with other roasteries of our size. So the industry really kind of grew for us, with us, the specialty green coffee brokerage industry. So we didn't know it, but we were we had so many benefits that, people today don't have. It's just, you try to get into coffee now and it's like advanced science. It's amazing. But yesterday, 1995, a different story, much easier.
So you were pushing the brokers who were doing cupping to be more detailed and more specific about what you were looking for.
Yeah. The brokers had an incentive that like they could sell their coffee for, I don't know, 6 to 10, 20 cents more a pound to us in small quantities. And with the expectation that we could get bigger. And they knew that if we got bigger, they'd have a good loyal customer. And the only way that they're going to keep those relationships, so that relationship between this little unknown company called Caldi's and themselves good, is to make sure that we got good coffee. So they would go out and get the very best coffees. They knew how to cup the coffee. They realized, well, we can apply what we've been doing for these canners of coffee and, volume roasters to these smaller roasters. You can apply what we know and we can just get the very best coffee. There's not a lot of it, but we can kind of send it to Howard and Suzanne and people like that. And we'd get it. And our coffee all of a sudden was marginally better than a Renoco. And then it became a lot better because they were making more money. These brokers were making more money and now you had these brokers really able to sell coffee to 2 different types of customers. And now they had a brand new vertical, really a brand new stream of revenue. And that was these micro roasters. And that's what happened. And it just kept slicing and slicing and slicing. And so now you have this extremely rarefied community of specialty brokers that cater only to the most demanding and specific micro roasters. It's fascinating what's happened now. So, the industry, when you talk about, if you want to talk about a compressed, fast moving growth and expansion of an industry, or at least a segment of an industry, look at coffee. Don't look at tech. Tech is slow compared to coffee.
Wow.
All right. Because coffee didn't do anything for, since 600 when it was discovered. It just it really meteored in the past 30 years.
That's interesting. That's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
So that improved quality of coffee, how did it start influencing the way, well, not only you roasted it, but the way you prepared it?
Well, yeah. At some point, the industry realized that, okay, the brokers have done a fantastic job of sourcing coffees that stand out from the commodity coffees that are available to the larger commercial roasters. And so we have to now it was our turn in around 2006, 2007, 2008, the micro roasters and retailers, the Caldi's of the world, now we're given this great blessing of fantastic coffees that could differentiate themselves in the market. We had to now step up our skills to match the potential of those green coffees. And what happened was the United States Barista Championship circuit was launched. And that was a way of, it was a competition, a national competition to see who was the best barista in the world. It was the World Barista Competition ultimately, but in this country, it was a way to kind of, it did a number of things. So you're taking this thing that everyone's training their own baristas in all kinds of ways. Maybe my latte looks like, the cappuccino across the town, and this person's mocha looks like something, which all the drinks is like the Wild West in making drinks. So how do we standardize these things? How do we make sure that cappuccino is a cappuccino? Because the best thing you can do for an industry is standardize the general concept and then compete on a level playing field. So at least the customer's expectation is that a cappuccino is going to be a third of milk and a little bit of frothy, velvety, almost like a melted ice cream consistency to it. We want to have that. So the competitions, the judges in these competitions were trained to calibrate, and that's the term they use, calibrate their sensory expectations and visual expectations so that the product is the same, so that all these baristas who are coming to compete in these competitions throughout the year, those baristas would all be making the drinks the same size, using the same volume of vessels, and the standards were the same. And what that did was it created the environment where you could have a product, a cappuccino could be compared. Like Now today, thanks to that, I'm happy to put Caldi's cappuccino up against any roaster in the country without fear that we're going to have some embarrassing difference. Like, well, our cappuccino is better because it's 20 ounces. That's crazy. But that was what it was like in the mid 90s and even into the early 2000s. The cappuccino is whatever I call it. It's like,
yeah. So now these competitions incentivize you to send your baristas to make sure you are at the quality level expected of all baristas around the US and around the world for that matter.
Yeah, the effect was not to create a new spectator sport, because what could be more exciting than watching people make coffee? It's amazing. But what could, it's really, I mean, it's like, how about a grass growing competition? I know. And, but people would we hosted these barista competitions for years, and people would feel we can get more people in there. We'd have these people making coffee and people are watching them make coffee. Like, this is crazy. People are watching this. They did. But that really wasn't the goal. The goal was to have a standard that you could train to. I mean, that was ultimately the goal. And so it was brilliant. I don't know if the United States Barista Committee or the Guild was really thinking that would happen. But what it did was it calibrated everybody. It educated the baristas and the consumers and the shop owners. And it said, okay, this is good, this is right, and this isn't right. This is a standard, this isn't a standard. And it wasn't just an arbitrary standard. It was a standard that was based on a true sensory improvement. A technically competent cappuccino is going to be a better experience, better sensory experience for the customer. That's the whole fundamental. It's not any different than the Olympics, watching someone skate. Best skaters are the ones who get the best scores.
Yeah, and I like how back when we talked on other times, you advised me to have a coffee shop that I was consulting with create their own internal latte art competition between the baristas. Right. Yeah. And it was really unique. The young baristas, you could watch them in one night competing against each other, level up their skills in what would have taken probably months. It was a really great piece of advice. And they still do that to this day.
It was one of those things that we seized upon early. And what you're describing is what we call it in the coffee parlance is a latte art throwdown. That's what they're called. And they're internal or sometimes very small invitational competitions where you invite baristas, usually like in an evening or on a weekend, maybe a slow night, and you hire a judge from out in the community, maybe like your best customers. You grab Joe's a doctor, but he's really a good customer and he maybe tips well and all the baristas like him and he's there. So just those kinds of people, you kind of say, hey, you want to be a judge? Say, well, I don't know how to be a judge. And say, well, we're going to show you how to be a judge. We're going to meet for, 40 minutes before the competition. And our lead trainer is going to go over everything, what to look for and how to score and what, all that and visually and by taste, all of that. And then all of a sudden this person has learned more about coffee and they're going to tell a lot of people. Pick your biggest mouth customers and let them spread the word and make them judges and give them a cup or something. And it's just going to be a fun evening. And now the baristas have an audience and they have an art platform in a sense. And they have try doing that for your shoe store or you can't do it. I'm not going to try doing that. Or if it's hard. It's hard to find a job. 6 months of training can make you into an impressive artist. I would challenge any industry to present that as a challenge. I mean, good luck, finding an industry like that. That's what makes coffee such a beautiful industry. I've seen these baristas go from, I just got this part-time job to I could have a career here. I feel like an artist. I feel like, and it gets down to the concept that we talk about a lot. You and I talk about a lot, Matt, is that concept of getting paid in a secondary currency, alternative currency.
Yeah. And love to go more into that.
Yeah, it's super important. And it really is probably the best example of natural economics being beneficial to individuals and community. And I think that's when the barista who comes in working for maybe, $12 an hour, $16 an hour, and which could be, it seems like a lot of money to me. When I was a kid, I was working for like $3 an hour. That's how old I am. But that's maybe enough to kind of get them to, happy with their summer job, or maybe they're just working through college or whatever. That's great. But what is a career? Careers are paid in multiple currencies. First, obviously, you have to provide people a livable wage. And the industry's proven that coffee can do that. There's a good training program can produce the revenues that allow a well-run shop, not a perfectly run shop, but a well-run shop, a seriously run shop, to employ people who can make a living. But that's not enough. That's not enough as humans. We're not here for that. We are artists, and we have senses, and we have, emotions, and we have options, choices. So to get the very best people and to keep them, we pay them in an alternative currency also. And that is the ability to get the admiration and love of the customer. And when that young barista hands a latte art, a beautiful cappuccino with a Rosetta or a swan or a heart or all the other designs that you'll see in a latte art throwdown or a competition, they hand that to the customer. That reaction, that appreciation, that love is as valuable, if not more valuable, than their wage. Of course, they need the wage to pay their rent, but they can get that anywhere. You can get that working. I'm knocking shoe stores. Shoe stores are fine, but but you don't have a lot of time to put your. You don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of opportunities. Yes. It's really, you might be able to. I'm going to hold that, put a bookmark on that, because I'm going to talk about that too. I think that's really important. There is a way, but I do think that coffee offers, the coffee industry offers a unique ability for people to pay their employees in multiple meaningful and valuable currencies. And the number one starts with a livable wage. Definitely doable. We've proven it. And then how do you keep people for a lifetime? How do you keep people? Give them a chance to make art for the customer, and then to show, and then moving up the ladder to be a trainer and show other baristas that are coming in how to do that. And then move up, how to show your wholesale customers how to do that. And that keeps going. You become a superstar in this business pretty quickly, because those skills, while they look very difficult and they are challenging, anyone who wants to can learn how to pour beautiful latte art. I've seen it thousands of times.
Where do you think the required passion comes from? Do they come in there with it, or do they learn it?
The best baristas, the ones with the most potential, have no idea it's there. They don't even know that there's art waiting for them. They just walk in and they see the barista that's training them or working with them. They just look over the shoulder and they're like, what the hell was that? That changed my life. That's
awesome.
This is not a job. This is a lifestyle. This is something that I can grow with and will grow with me.
And I've often seen that these alternative currencies can turn into real currencies in the case of present your latte art. And I like what Caldi does, at least one of them. They have a tip jar at the front where they take the order. There's also a tip jar where they give you your latte or your coffee. And you present this art, and this, like, it almost, that translates into the extra appreciation for the time they took to make that for you, and you tip them again. And
yeah, well, maybe if that's, tip, I don't know if you know this or your listeners know this, but tip originally stands for to ensure promptness. And it's an old term, and probably from the 18th century. And then and so maybe the second tip is to ensure perfection, or but it's not only but it's a good point. Really, what you're saying, I guess, is the customer is receiving two products. Mm-hmm. They're receiving everything they got when coffee was 50 cents. They're getting the caffeine delivery system. Mm-hmm. They're having that expected retail exchange. But then they're getting the surprise, and they're getting the delight, and they're getting something that you can't get at McDonald's. You can't get that. You can get kindness, you can get friendliness, but can you get artistry? Can you get a bespoke experience for under $5? Good luck with that throughout your day.
All right. Well, we definitely blew past the whole pour, and I guess the only thing I want to get into a little bit is what were some of your challenges early on about building the team of baristas who were learning to be baristas in that fashion, in that growing change of coffee and specialty coffee and third wave coffee. You could probably talk a little bit about that. I guess you were discovering along with them.
Yeah, I don't believe in the entrepreneur story as I work, 900 hours a week and in a snowstorm. No, it was a joy and it was easy. There were no challenges with employees, no significant challenges with attracting, with recruiting, training, and retaining those employees. We did not have challenges because we had multiple currencies. I can't emphasize how important that is in any business to have multiple. If you can create multiple currencies by simply maybe having an in-house competition for who can provide the best customer service based on ratings. Multiple currencies. Get recognized. Don't just paycheck is not enough recognition for employees, particularly young people everyone, but young people, most of our employees are their first or second job they've had.
What advice would you have for somebody that's maybe struggling with that turnover, and what would they have? What would you suggest them to look for those alternative currencies? How would they look for those or create those?
Well, the first job, the first currency you have to make sure is set is that you must pay your employees a livable wage. You have to pay them something. Now, if they can't work in enough hours, if they think no one's going to be able to, if they can work 8 or 10 hours a week, it's livable by the hour. They need to be able to make $16 to $20 an hour. Now, is that livable? It's borderline livable for a young person who's just starting out and maybe has a roommate. That's definitely doable if they're working
and location
30 hours a week and location, right? All of that. But your job as an operator and as a manager is to ensure that your employees are paid a wage that is respectable, that allows them to look in the mirror every morning and say, this is worth it. It's worth it getting up and doing this. And they're not preoccupied with thinking what other jobs are out there for them, because that'll destroy an industry very quickly. If all your employees are thinking what else is out there, asking their customers that walk in, hey, do you know anyone who's hiring? You don't want that. You want to create a sustainable business that can afford itself. If you don't have employees who are being paid a livable wage, you don't have a business. You have a plantation. So we want to, in our industry, is to set up a standard so that people are paid a livable wage. Once you have that locked down, then it becomes easy because you don't have to worry about people constantly looking for jobs elsewhere. It takes that pressure off of you a little bit. Then you can focus on training and quality control, and you recognize, well, what is your job as a cafe operator? Well, you have the lever, and you could apply this to other retail sectors. You have these 3 levers, right? I always talk about quality, customer service, and atmosphere. It's 3 things. Those are the 3 levers that you have. You don't have any more. And you have all 3 if you're an operator of a cafe. And so, those are the 3 things you can control. And if they're not always going to be strong all the time, you're going to have bad experiences at Caldi's. You're going to walk in, the place is going to be dirty. That's going to be a bad atmosphere. Or maybe the place is clean, but you got poor customer service because someone was in a bad mood or something. But as long as you have 2 of them, most people are going to be okay, unless it's really horrific. It's just a natural hedge, isn't it? Against, just a bad experience. So if you recognize that a beautiful place with a good quality product, with maybe not the best customer service experience, is still a good experience. It's just math. A place that is not looking so great today, but has great quality and great customer service. Well, we know those places, they're all over the place. There's tons of places like that. So do the math and just switch those around. You'll see that any combination of 2, preferably all 3 are firing. The better, the closer you get to that. That's the advice that I would give. Focus on those levers that you have of customer experience, because they comprise 3 things.
What of the team, your leadership team, as Caldy's grew and your team communication, how important did that play into the growth of Caldy's overall to where it is?
The communication, well, that was an area that I think we struggled, and I think probably it's still like that. I think that is the most difficult element of running a business is that communication, because once the business is successful, some level, once it's kind of established, once you're not in, are we going to be around next month? Are we going to be able to pay the rent? Once you're past that level and your business is, then the instinct of that owner, that manager is to grow. So they're working, and they're not going to be growing by trying to sell the doctor who comes in every morning 2 coffees instead of 1. That's not how you grow. That's not the growth that I'm talking about. You're trying to sell your coffee to Schnucks, sell your coffee to Deerberg, sell your coffee to Kroger, trying to open new stores. So you're not working in the business, you're working on the business. And so often the owner of the business, the top management is focused on working on the business and leaving the people who are in the business to work in the business. And that's dangerous. And now you have the schism, and we have a schism. We have 2, not competing, but different goals, primary goals. One is to give the customer a great experience, and the other is to grow the business. You have to make sure your business is in sync, and that's where the communication is. And I think had we recognized that, recognition is number 1. You can't have to recognize it before you address it. That's super important. You can probably talk about that more than I can.
Yeah, I was like, you're speaking to me. It's like, you guys, right. If you find any coffee shop out there that finds themselves in this particular situation, I would love to help reconnect your owner with your team.
Please, because that would have, as successful as Caldy's has been, most of that growth, not because of me, but I can tell you that it would have been 3 or 4 times, and I kid you not, 3 or 4 times faster success or bigger success had we had that connection, that right brain, left brain connection in our business. We didn't have it. We didn't have it. And it's exhausting when you don't have it, because it's like your left hand is doing one thing, your right hand's doing something else. And you can have both. You just have to have those check-ins. We call them meetings. And we didn't have meetings. Nobody has meetings unless there's a problem and it's too late,
Yeah.
So if we could have had some help with that, or if we could have recognized it, we just didn't. We didn't recognize it.
And even if you're having meetings, there's a difference between ineffective and effective meetings. So definitely have to.
We had so many ineffective meetings about everything. Yeah. And they were all well-intentioned, and sometimes they would just turn into bitching sessions. And that's great. It's great to vent, but it's not necessarily productive. And a meeting without, it basically turns into a meeting without an agenda is really just a bitch session.
It's an excuse to have another meeting is basically what happens.
Right. It's an invitation to have another meeting.
Exactly.
And you're paying for those people to show up after hours or to close early for a meeting. We all seen signs on doors saying close for a staff meeting. It's like, make sure that time is well used if you're going to piss off your customers and pay your customers and pay your employees at the same time. So,
Yeah. So we're down to our final couple questions here. What trends are you seeing from your outside perspective now in the beverage industry?
Well, the beverage industry is like insane right now. It's blown up. I mean, I think the number of SKUs in beverage stock keeping units is ridiculous. I mean, there's an energy drink for every thought of the day, mood of the day. So beverage, if you look at beverage overall, I think it's gone crazy. It's just gotten crazy. Maybe it's great. Maybe choices here. Maybe I'm just showing my age. I don't know, but it seems really like every time I go to the store, it's like there's a zillion beautifully designed bottles and cans and options, also fresh options, bubble tea, everything. There's so much of it out there. And I think it's overwhelming to consumers. And it is really speaks to the problem is that it's just a product, because the industry of co-packing, people that will make that product for you, most of these companies aren't making this themselves. They're just hiring a marketing person and coming up with a flavor profile and having someone make it for them. And they just notice why the cans are all the same size. It's because the same company's producing all this stuff. You're just using a different label. I mean, it shouldn't be a secret to anybody. So but what is it like? It may be quality, maybe, but it's certainly, where's the customer service? Where's the atmosphere? Hedge yourself with a business where you can control more levers. And when you're making a product that goes into the shelves of a Schnuck store, and they're lovely people, and we're glad that we sell more coffee than anyone at Schnucks. But make sure that you can present not just a beverage to satisfy a thirst, but also an experience to satisfy a need, and an atmosphere to satisfy that sensory delight that we all seek. It's important.
Yeah. And for listeners out there that are not from Missouri, Schnucks is our local grocery store, pretty large one, kind of like a Kroger. So just let everybody know.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. And then finally, you've watched this third wave coffee, grow. Have you ever landed on your most favorite beverage of all these? Espressos, black coffee, anything that you really just kind of can still come back to this day?
Well, my most delightful favorite coffee beverage, I should say beverage of all, is a naturally processed Ethiopian hand brew. That's my go-to. Now, I'm not going to get too specific about, whether it's a bee house or a Chemex or, I'm going to leave that to the barista. And I'm not going to get too focused on the estate or the farm where the Ethiopian natural processed coffee comes from. That's dependent on the weather and the climate and the hand of the barista. But I will say that if you haven't experienced Kaldi's Ethiopian naturally processed hand brewed coffee, you treat yourself. Treat yourself.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here. Howard, this was crazy informative. There's going to be people, they're going to love to glean what you've learned. And I really do hope they listen to it, take it to heart. And a lot to be learned for new coffee shop owners and established coffee shop owners. I thank you a ton for your time. This was very valuable. And again, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thanks so much. And thanks for your good questions.
All right.
Help somebody.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Harvest to Pour, the business of beverages with Matthew Shipp. Check the show notes for our guest contact information and connect with Matthew Shipp on LinkedIn today.